Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Umar.
Alaikum salam.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
I'm very happy to be here.
So alhamdulillah, there are just a few questions I would like to ask you regarding permaculture. I guess the first question is, if by your definition, how do you understand what is permaculture and why is it important?
Permaculture is a type of permanent agriculture that sustains us and sustains itself. And one of the most basic things in it is getting the soil right, so that the soil is alive, because healthy food has to come from living soil, and nutrients are not enough. And healthy soil, which is living soil, produces healthy food that produces healthy human beings. The organic movement began in the 19th century in British colonial India, which included Afghanistan and Pakistan and India, Bangladesh, Burma. But what certain British researchers discovered was that some Muslims are extremely healthy. And they're healthy because, well, in the beginning they didn't know why. They thought it might be race or something like that. Maybe they were remnants of Alexander the Great's armies. But then they discovered it was their soil. And they discovered that these people, especially in regions of what are today the mountainous parts of Pakistan, that they know how to keep their soil alive. And therefore they are healthy and alive. So it begins with the land, and in fact our concept of community in Islamic law is there is no community without land. And we don't have to be rigid about understanding that, because today we can have communities virtually with WhatsApp and things like that. Those are meaningful, although they're not the ultimate. But you know, you have to have community, you have to have land and water and food, and permaculture is one of the best ways of going about doing that. And we can take land which is dead and we can make it live. You can take land that has been made so salty by bad agricultural practices that we can bring it back to life in just a few years, as Brother Jamaluddin Jeff Lawton has done in Jordan. So permaculture has a lot to offer us, and it enables us also to create the garden city. The garden city in Islam is, every city in Islam is a garden city. And it means it's got land, it's got water, it produces food, it's a garden. And so we can even produce food in our houses, in our apartments, you know, on our balconies, on the sides of our balconies. And the production of food is one of the most revolutionary acts in our time. We need to be producers and not consumers.
Beautiful.
Or we can be both, but we should also be producers.
Beautiful. You mentioned two concepts here. One is the garden city, and the second, this concept that you will find, you find this concept in the Quran about giving, that's mentioned about the dead earth, giving back to life. Are there any other aspects of our tradition or prophetic teachings that you find that align with permaculture?
I would say that permaculture aligns with our tradition, not the other way around. And in fact, most of our legislation about the environment comes from water rights. The way we can't pollute water, and how do we use water, how do we distribute it. The unfortunate thing is that Muslims today have lost their moral compass, and they don't know they don't know, as a rule, with the exception of some villages and communities in the Muslim world here and there, they don't know how to live ethically anymore. And in fact, our cities, which were wonders of the world, that produced all the food they needed in the city, they produced it around the city too, but everything they needed was in the city. We used to take pride in the fact that we don't have to import anything, even though we were the greatest importers. But you know, some cities like Tarim in Hadramaut would pride itself that we only need to import scissors, razors, and needles. everything else we do here. Most Muslim cities didn't have to import razors and needles and scissors. They made them. But, you know, we have this legislation, but today, unfortunately, as an ummah, we are the greatest offenders. We are the greatest polluters on earth. That's why when we ourselves talk about this theme, we decided on a title, Tending the Earth, the Art of Living with God's Creation. And we did that out of shame, that we don't want to put Islam in it because we're not doing it right now. And so we have to do that. This earth is the garden of the water, of the trees, of the birds, of the animals. This is not your garden. You're this keeper of this garden. And you've got to make these plants happy. You've got to, you know, make the animals happy. There's an ethical way of raising animals and of eating animals, of sacrificing animals. This is absolutely incumbent upon us. And the food industry that we have today, the agricultural industry that we have today, is one of the greatest affronts to God on the face of the earth. Because animals can't be treated like this. Plants can't be treated like this. So this is our tradition. And permaculture fits into that very beautifully. Moorish filaha, Moorish agriculture in Spain and Portugal and in Sicily was extremely similar to what great permaculturalists like Bill Mollison have come up with today.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
For those perhaps that are not as aware or informed of permaculture, what advice would you give to them in terms of the importance of perhaps participating or learning about permaculture?
Well, permaculture teaches you things that make you human. And one of the things is to learn how to make soil, that it's alive. And you can actually do that with 3 parts of carbon, which could be sticks, 2 parts of nitrogen, which can be green grass, and another part of something like manure that gets it catalyzed. And then again, you put 3-2-1, 3-2-1, you put it in a wire mesh. You have to make sure to water it correctly. Even though that's easy to describe, you need to do that hands-on. And then in 18 days, you've got soil because it gets hot. And you can't even necessarily put your hand in it. You don't want it too hot. But this is something that we find as human beings extremely transformative, extremely transitional, extremely human. And I think everything in permaculture, learning about your neighbors, the plants, your brothers and sisters, the trees, and living with them. This makes us human. It's very good for us. Unfortunately, a lot of us today are alienated from ourselves. We're alienated from our environments. And some of us who are immigrants or the children of immigrants in Western countries, often we don't identify with those countries. And I know the case of a young man in Australia who was Lebanese. And he was a refugee. His country had been destroyed by war, civil war. He didn't feel accepted in Australia. He felt that Australians were racist. And he was taken on a trip to learn about permaculture and things like that, and to plant trees, which is an act of worship. And he said that I hated this country until I put my hand in the earth of this country. And when I did that, I belonged. And I began to love it. And I said, I belong here. And I began to think of all the good that's in it. So contact with nature, with animals, with trees, with soil, getting your hands in the soil, this is extremely beneficial for us. And permaculture teaches you how easy that is to do. But you're probably not going to get it from a book. It's easy, but you need to be shown how to do it. And So I recommend very highly that people partake of this and that we continue to have these programs, and that we do this as stewards of the earth. And I believe, and actually I've witnessed things that prove this to me, because in Spain we made soil and then we created these permacultural gardens, of, again, 3 parts carbon, 2 parts nitrogen, 1 part manure. Then we put garden soil on the top. And it's like the next day, this was the dry season, it never rains. It thundered for like 30 minutes. I didn't even believe it was thunder. I thought it must be airplanes. I went outside, it was thunder. Then the rain came, which was beautiful rain. It came on and on. And so what I believed in that is the heavens and earth are dancing. And they're dancing because you're doing finally the right thing. You're bringing them back to life. So this is part of what we owe to ourselves. It's what we owe to the plants and animals and to the world around us. And I advise everybody to learn this. Become producers. Don't just be a consumer. Learn how to be self-sufficient and independent, and enjoy the people around you. And enjoy the society around you. You can still go to Whole Foods and pay your whole paycheck, but you can also make your own food. It's relatively easy, and complement it with whatever you want.
And just in closing, Dr. Umar, there's an endeavor, inshallah, that we'll be launching here at Zaytuna, which is called the Zaytuna Center for Ethical Living and Learning. And we hope, by the grace of God, that you will come and be a part of these discussions and teaching and learning.
This is where we ought to be, because a lot of times today, since we're under attack, we just had Punish a Muslim Day, that some right-wing fanatics had proposed that people do. We're under attack, and we've got to take the initiative. We can't just be responding to the lies that are said about us. We can't just be trying to remove the fears that people shouldn't have about us, but they do. But we've got to serve, and we've got to love. And one of the greatest things that we can do is be the steward on earth that you're meant to be. And this is win-win. And then when we do this, also we'll find that the most beautiful people in these societies find us, and we find them. Because there's so many people, Jews, Christians, and others, First Nations, who are working actively in these things, even though we're slow starters. But we're getting started. And we have an obligation to do this. And people like Bill Mollison, if you read his famous classic on permaculture, if you get the early editions, you will see that he was very, very consternated by the so-called organized religions, that you haven't really done anything, whereas First Nations, indigenous peoples, they've usually been attuned to this. And he began to change that outlook when he discovered through Jeff Lawton, his dear friend, who'd become a Muslim, that we actually have this in our religion. And that's not to say that Christians and Jews don't have it in theirs. But in ours, it's very clear and very specific. And we have to do this. And when we do this, then we discover ourselves and the beauty in ourselves, and we discover the most beautiful people around us who are our friends and our natural allies, and who can really help us with this more than we can help ourselves.